hosts, and I'm very excited to have you guys here today. I'm really excited about today's conversation. It's slightly different than our normal kind of programming. We have Will Lucas here today. He is the chairman of the board of Minthouse, one of the leading companies in corporate housing short-term rentals. And Will and I connected through mutual connections, and I'm really excited for him to share his story on the show today. He's built a tremendous business, and we both started around the same time and place here in New York. Started with our spouse, and I'm very curious to hear about his journey and how he's built his business. So I think you'll really enjoy the conversation today. Well, welcome, and thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Will, why don't we give the folks a quick introduction? Tell us a little bit about yourself and the business that you built at Minthouse.
Yeah, certainly. So, um, originally from DC, I've spent some time in various cities, but ultimately founded Minthouse in New York City back in January of 2017. Been a career entrepreneur before that. Did not come from the hotel space or the real estate space or the short-term rental space, and so this is kind of 2017 was my first foray into all of those categories. But just to kind of give you an overview of Minthouse today, Minthouse operates in 22 buildings across 10 plus cities around the country. What we do is we take over multifamily buildings, so Class A multifamily buildings. We typically take, 40 or more units in any one building. More and more, we take entire multifamily buildings, 100 units or more, and are part of the development process with the developers. And we run these buildings like hotels, and we have invested a lot in technology and distribution and brand, and we aim to deliver a differentiated premium experience, all powered by technology. So from the guest standpoint, that means checking in with your phone, opening the door with your phone. You can order groceries pre-arrival that are waiting in the fridge before. You can talk to us through the digital concierge. And from a business model standpoint, we are signing management agreements with our building owners. So we're not signing leases. So the deals that we sign look a lot like the deal a hotel like Marriott would sign with their real estate partner.
Gotcha. So and that's great. Minthouse, one of the premier brands or premier companies in the I'll kind of just group it together as in the short-term rental space. So, Will and I's connection, Minthouse took over a building in Philadelphia that we were operating in. We had about 10 units within that building, and then the owner decided to convert the entire building, which was Class A multifamily that had a mixture of short-term rentals and long-term rentals, and decided to convert the entire building to a Minthouse. It was actually one of our nicer buildings. We were sad to lose it, but we were at least glad to see a high-quality operator come in and do some great work there. It had some beautiful views of Philadelphia. Alas, things have changed in the interim, but it's a great building.
Totally, yeah. So that building, I think, is 105 units. And yeah, kind of a unique property. It was at one point in time, it was a hotel, and then somebody had converted it to apartments, and so great retail on the bottom floor. And at some point, through negotiations with the owner, we moved into the entire building. So Philly is one of our markets. Yeah, most of our markets are up and down the East Coast, extending all the way out to Texas and Colorado and Denver.
I love the East. I love the East Coast. So we are obviously I live in New York. Both of us kind of started this in New York. The East Coast, although it has the regulations, which don't impact you guys as much if you guys take over the whole buildings, but I love the East Coast because it's a lot of traffic and high ADRs. Generally, it's people kind of spend more, so dollar margin generally always looks better than some of the other geographies that in the coastal markets generally work a lot better. in that capacity, where you can generate kind of higher returns from an absolute basis and just more kind of dollar margin. I'm kind of curious though, like, why don't we kind of zoom? You kind of built this great business. Let's zoom back to when you first started. You started in December of 17. My wife and I started right around the same time. We launched our first unit December 28th, 2016. I remember that because I was still working in investment banking, and that was like, the time that we had off. My wife and I started our first building, so we worked through Christmas and get it up and running so that we could hit New Year's, and then we saw kind of how well it did, and then that was kind of the start of our journey. Maybe talk about that. When you first started in Jan 17, the genesis of the idea, and I believe you started with your wife. Kind of just walk us through that.
Yeah, certainly. So my story is, so I just sold my company that I was running before in 2016. And
What
so
was the company? What was that company?
It's an e-commerce business that we actually acquired and sold, a direct-to-consumer e-commerce business.
Okay, cool.
So, totally different category. And coming out of that, I was actually planning on not diving into something that was going to be all-consuming. And so at this point in time, Airbnb was still, not super well known. But I had been tuned into the market and was enamored with it. So my plan was to buy a few properties and put them on Airbnb and kind of have fun while doing it, make some money, but not necessarily try to build anything with any scale, and sort of figure out what I was going to do, next. In the process of learning about the Airbnb and short-term rental market, what I realized back then is that 99.9% of the market was independent owners, mom and pop type operators, or folks renting out their home that they live in. And so what I realized back then is what the market really needed was someone to deliver a brand that would come with safety, security, reliability, trust, all the things that a hospitality brand delivers in the traditional hotel market. And furthermore, came to understand that corporations, so all of corporate travel, which is a huge and extremely lucrative travel segment for the hotel world, was basically locked out of being able to stay in Airbnbs. And this is because for compliance and safety and security reasons. So a big company is generally not going to let their employees stay at an unverified Airbnb. Yet there is tons of demand from, especially at that point in time, the younger travelers working at McKinsey and the big banks that would prefer to stay in an Airbnb rather than the Marriott when they travel. And so if you could build a brand that came with those compliance features, then you could unlock this whole category of travel into this booming new alternative accommodations category. So I think that was already very interesting to me, and so began exploring further. I think the final piece that then caused me to really dive in here was when I realized that there was a real structural reason why hotels have been so slow to implement technology that's been implemented across all these other categories. And so the example I always point to is that there's a reason why airports have been able to do away with the mandatory check-in process, 15 years ago, and still 90+% of hotels require a mandatory check-in process. And it's not because the hotel companies aren't aware of this technology and don't want to implement it. It's just because of all the different players involved in operating a hotel. It makes implementing new technology very difficult. There's a number of different stakeholders involved in the management of any one hotel. So that was a final piece to it. There's an opportunity to rethink the tech stack, build it from scratch, and be able to deliver a seamless, check-in and stay for our guests. And so with that, all those pieces together, I was now, very excited to try to build a brand in this category.
So how'd you start? That you see this opportunity now, right? Where it's a highly fragmented space. Just to recap, it's a highly fragmented space. A lot of mom and pop, right? So we're like, you put your finance hat on. It's like, okay, you have this big growth opportunity. The supply is pretty fragmented. There's demand that's unmet. How do I bridge that? Let's use technology. So then, how did you? But you were, you just exited a business. You wanted to start something different. You were gonna go kind of the more bootstrap route, I would say, like kind of buy a few things, put it on, make it nice. But then, you opted to go a completely different direction. You know, I guess like, my question would be, as you kind of went through that decision matrix, right? Like, did you just go and raise capital and target a building first, and then kind of go that route? Did you do some, rental arbitrage to start? Because I know a lot of the management companies now, started with more of a lease model and the lease sublease model, just to kind of prove out to the developers and the owners of these properties, where you come in and say, hey, I'll split it with you, which is more of a management model, versus, hey, I guarantee you, X dollars, however, whatever structure that looks like. I guarantee you X dollars to let me do this, and then transition into more of a shared revenue model. Maybe just kind of talk us through that, because I think that's where a lot of people have questions, right? It's like, how do you go kind of to the very kind of right of the spectrum and kind of get these management agreements and big buildings? Like, there has to be kind of a process there. Maybe kind of talk us through that.
Yeah. So a lot of good questions there. So I think the first piece is just around capital. So can you bootstrap this, or you have to raise capital? I think there are pros and cons in both strategies. For the business that I was envisioning, I think the decision was made for me, which was that I needed to raise capital, and I probably needed to, over the life cycle of the business, raise a lot of capital. And that's because in order to build a big brand that can be attractive to these big companies and be able to attract the interest and buy-in of some of these big buildings, you need to invest a lot upfront in the infrastructure, in the brand, in the technology, in the furniture, in order to be able to achieve that. I think doing it in a bootstrapped way would take too long, and you might never ever, and then you kind of are left with a legacy portfolio that doesn't necessarily match where you're trying to get to. So the kind of the steps that you'd have to take, you'd have to unwind eventually. And so probably for the business that I had envisioned, raising capital was the right strategy. And so what did I do? I put together a deck, and I began, simultaneously thinking about raising capital and getting my first market off the ground. Underwrote a bunch of markets. I was in New York at the time, where I was for 15 years before moving down to where I am now in Raleigh, Durham. I was hoping that I could find a market that was in New York that would work, or right next door. The most attractive market that was within striking distance ended up being Nashville. So Nashville was the market that sort of popped off the spreadsheets in terms of attractiveness for a whole bunch of different reasons. Kind of with that market and a full business plan in tow, I raised, my first round of capital, which was around $1 million, and opened up my first 2 buildings in Nashville. So to your question about, can you jump right in? Can you sign management agreements right out of the gate? The answer is no. You still, even with, some capital, we still had to, take some stepping stones to where we ultimately wanted to get. So that meant all of our first deals were lease arbitrage deals. So we were taking, our first building was 10 apartments in a multifamily building in Nashville. And then from there, we were able to get actually a small full building. Again, a lease deal. I think it was about 22 units in Nashville. And then ultimately what we did with our first, couple of buildings was proved out the economics, proved that we could operate, proved the demand, proved that the supply, the building owners would actually let us take these units in their communities. At that point in time, that was, 95% of the buildings I walked into would tell me to get lost because, this was not something that they had seen before, and a hotel-like operation inside their community was not something they were comfortable with. And I totally understand that. Um, and then, from there, it was add on more markets, continue to scale, continue to invest in infrastructure, distribution, build out a team that could, a corporate team that was speaking to both local corporations and national corporations, all the big consulting firms, all the big banks, Fortune 500 companies, and sort of like brick by brick, continue to build out the infrastructure and the platform, and raise capital at many steps along the way as we scaled.
Yeah, I mean, how long did that take you? I mean, that's so, you started with, raised it, did it, I would assume like got friends and family around for 1 million, and then you got the first 10, then the 22. Were when you're just maybe just in kind of like chapter one, was that, all in Nashville? Did you kind of, pivot to different markets? Was it primarily governed by what the spreadsheets told you, or is it more kind of like the relationships now that you've built, and then you kind of follow, because a lot of people, what they do is, or what I've heard is, you develop a good relationship with a developer, they obviously have multiple projects going on, and then you kind of just like follow along their growth path. And you just kind of talk about that chapter one, how did you kind of get to enough scale where you raise that next round?
Yeah. So, I would say our first 2, 3 markets were, almost entirely driven by what the spreadsheets told me. I think part of the strategy we had, I think at one point initially we had 3 buildings in Nashville, and consciously we decided to open up a second market such that we could prove to investors that this market works, in more than one market.
Fair.
And so I think, oddly enough, the next market we opened up was in Detroit. Detroit just popped for us right off the spreadsheet, even though it's not a market that you would typically put next to a Nashville with all the high growth and everything that's happening there. But that ended up being, pretty reliable and positive market as well. I should maybe jump to the end. So all said and done, as we continue to scale, we've since raised over $100 million at Mint House. But that comes in pieces, $1 million, and then the next round was 4, the next round was 10, and they go up over time.
Sorry, could I pause you there? That's a big number, right? You raised $100 million to scale this business. I think a lot of people are like, wow, like, a 9-digit number is, it's a sizable raise in the space. I'm curious about that process. As you are, you go from 1 to 4 to 20 to 7, however that cadence went. Was it, there's so much opportunity out there, like I need this growth capital in order to capture these markets for, other people see the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow and jump in? Or was it more of, I mean, just, yeah, like I don't want to presume an answer, but because that's a real, that you guys have raised probably the most, you're a company that's raised one of the largest kind of quantum of capital into space. And I think a lot of people are interested in that, as they're kind of thinking about growing their business. We can just talk a little bit about that fundraising process.
Yeah. So like, one of the ways to kind of slice that question would be like, so what are the drivers? Why would you go that, why would you raise that much? And I think one of them, which is what I touched on, which is, the capital that you raise allows you to really invest heavily in the infrastructure that would, allow you to be a scale premium brand. And
Okay.
so, to have a a distribution team and a big sales team that is, bringing in contracts with big corporations, that costs money because you've got to get really good people that have prior relationships. You've got to have one in every market plus a corporate team. If you want to build out a really slick guest experience, then you need a development team. And all of this on top of just the operations teams that make it go around. So I think part of it is to be able to build out that infrastructure to support the vision that you have. I think another piece of it is speed. So if you can raise capital, you can just do things faster. And at that point in time, Airbnb was booming, and I think it was clear that there were going to be some brands that can sort of ride the wave that Airbnb in large part was creating. So kind of a confluence of reasons why you would kind of continue to raise, you can continue to build infrastructure and to just move as fast as possible to sort of realize what you were envisioning.
And then on that process, like what part of it did you enjoy? Like as because it's a lot, right? There's the operational piece, there's the growth piece, there's the capital piece. As you kind of look back now, 8 years, I guess starting 8 years ago, what part of that were you heavily involved in the beginning? Did you have any co-founders or people that you hired? And then, just reframe that question. Like, what part of it did you like really enjoy? As you kind of built it out.
So I realized I never touched on the wife part. So that's awesome. You started this business with your wife. So I actually was a solo founder, but I did enlist the help and support from my wife all the way along the way. But so that first building that I opened up actually happened to be in July of 2017, and the move-in date came right around the July 4th holiday. So I actually told my wife, I said, look, we have to cancel our July 4th plans. Will you please come down to Nashville with me and help me? It's just me, help me set up the first 10 units and get this thing going. And so she graciously came down with me and was helping me move furniture and set up everything. And I think we spent a week down there together, getting everything set up. And then from that point, I was flying down to Nashville from New York, at least once a week for a while. Spent a lot of time in Nashville. And so that's kind of the kind of co-founder part. So what did I enjoy? I mean, in the beginning, you're wearing every single hat. I mean, I think this is true for the listeners of this podcast. I think they're probably, a lot of them are doing everything, what it's design, it's distribution, it's revenue management, it's branding, it's operations, they're doing everything. I did enjoy doing everything, with my own hands in the beginning. I think what's cool about our space in our industry is that unlike many products, especially, digital products in the tech world, when you have set it up and you've got people, there's a physical product that you can kind of look, you can walk, you can look at, you can see the guests coming in, and that might be the most rewarding piece of it. I think the most rewarding time. So we were fortunate. We opened up a big building at 70 Pine in New York City.
Yeah, beautiful, by the way. Love the building.
It's a wonderful property, and that property was actually ranked #1 in the country on TripAdvisor for a couple of years. And so I think that was probably one of the most rewarding things, to kind of see the whole model come together and then be out competing some of these, hotel companies that have been in business for 50 plus years. So I think that's kind of maybe the most rewarding piece. In terms of like function, I did really enjoy the sales component. So speaking to multifamily owners, operators, developers, and pitching them on and kind of educating the market in many cases on what our model even is, how it works, how do we do it in a way that doesn't disrupt the guests, how do you drive revenue, and then securing a sale with the owner, meaning like an agreement that we could now operate some large number of units in their building.
That's so kind of like, you love the deal, right? You love the sales part with, you know, with getting these, I think kind of starting with people not knowing how this model is, and then seeing their eyes kind of open, like, oh wow, really, you can do this at scale, and then getting it done, getting that deal signed. That's always like one of the nicest feelings, at least I have, when we're operating our business, kind of starting a new relationship with a new owner, and then getting that paper signed. But it's funny because like that's when actually the real work starts. It's like,
Right.
okay, we signed this deal. Maybe you have some period in between where you're setting up, and it's like, wow, then the work really starts then. And that's when, I think you're talking about how to scale a team. Like, it's just way too much to do on your own, or at least do it well on your own. Like, what was that kind of like, as you kind of build out your team, like, did you have like a team structure in mind, based on your prior experience as an entrepreneur? Like, how did you think about that team part? Because a lot of people struggle with that. You start this business, it's doing well, and you're like, well, I have to be involved in everything. And we went through that personal journey as well. We have to be involved in everything because it's so complex. You probably didn't write everything down when you started, and like hiring someone that have to train them and then do all this fun stuff, do all that kind of HR stuff is not really, I think, on the top of many people's lists. But then you kind of, it's a necessary thing you have to do in order to grow. Like, you can't, copy paste yourself. You have to copy and paste yourself through others. So we just talk about, like, who's that kind of first strategic hire or that first team that you hired that really gave you the wherewithal, the kind of the management wherewithal, the management bandwidth to take that next step into growing from 3 buildings in Nashville, that 1 extra building, or that next market in Detroit, to now call it now 22 buildings across. How many markets are you in, or is Minthouse in?
Probably about 12 markets.
12 markets, right? So that obviously requires a lot of infrastructure. Maybe just kind of that first hire, that first team. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, certainly. So I think this is a very interesting question, and the answer on kind of who you hire and why you hire that person changes as you scale. So initially, I'm a strong believer in hiring really good generalists. So just really smart people that can wear a lot of different hats and do a lot of different things and just figure things out. Because again, when you have a team of 2, 3, 4, 5, under 10, you still have, all these different types of functions that you need to do. You need to still do revenue management, you need to do HR, you need to do operations, and you need to do sales and distribution and everything. And so you don't, you can't have people coming in and specializing on one thing. You just, you don't have enough people to do that. And so I think initially we really just focused on really smart generalists that could maybe take on, a basket of 5 different functions. And then as you scale, now you start to bring in your first operations specific folks. And so you can start to target in your hiring process folks that have only done operations, that love to do operations, and are the best at operations, and plug them in to that piece of the business. And then as you kind of continue to scale, now you're looking at more senior leaders of these functions. So people that have built and led big teams in the past. And I think initially we were not hiring at all from the hotel world or the short-term rental world. That was not a requirement. As we scaled, we began to go, borrow more and more people that had, tried and true hotel experience. And so by the end, I think the management team is a nice mixture of former hotel people and people that came from outside the hotel or short-term rental world. I should say, when I say hotel, I really mean hotel and short-term rental.
Gotcha. Good.
But yeah, I mean, that's like it's one of the hardest things to do, because ultimately, and it's the most important thing you do, because the company is only as good as the people that are running it.
Truly.
And so it's the maybe the most important thing to try to get right.
I really, I like I truly, truly believe that. Like when even at our level, we have 40 units in our portfolio. 30 are lease arbitrage, where we sign leases and 3 to 6 year leases, and then we've taken those profits to buy. So we kind of gone a different route, but that initial team that you hire is so critical. And if you're listening now, and you are, no matter kind of where you are in that path, especially in the beginning, the generalist that is smart, hungry, is willing to be creative and do a lot of different things. Like that person is that person is the most valuable, because it gets to a point where you just can't do everything, and you're just going to drive yourself crazy, and you need that right hand person that is going to uh, you know take care of the things that you can't do, allow you to, I mean, for me, allow you to kind of go and try to grow the business while someone is operating it. So my manager Bill listens to this, so Bill, shout out to you. Thank you for being such a great partner for us throughout the years. um, and then, and I'm sure you have someone on, I'm sure there's a group of people that, you know, come to your mind that have helped
Totally.
you along that journey. The,
Totally, totally, yeah. And I would maybe just one thing I would add is there's
yeah,
even like a multiplier effect to the, people that you bring in early, because they end up recruiting and hiring folks that are underneath them, and the quality of those initial hires has a big impact on the quality of the,
huge.
next layer of hires. And so it's hugely important to kind of have the core be, aligned and very talented.
Yeah, I mean that culture part is critical, right? For me, it was, I came from the investment banking world, so the ethos was, you can do everything. It should be done yesterday, and it should be done perfectly. um, Not to say that was always like the right. I don't think that's like always the right approach. But at least from the beginning, that was like my mindset was like, I need to hire, or I need to get people on the team that can run that hard, and not be too sensitive when you get kind of direct feedback, because there's just so much going on, and you need that person, that group of people that can run hard with you and be with you along the way. And I think that is, for all the entrepreneurs out there, that is the most important thing you can do, because that person's going to train the next person. Like to your point, bring in new people. If you don't get that first, couple hires right, you're just, it's too hard later on. You get a lot of problems later on when people are like, oh, well, I'm just an ops person, I can't do this distribution stuff. Like, no, you can. Like, just, you know,
Right.
I'll teach you how to do it, and like you can do it, right? And I think there's a little bit of the mindset part there. And obviously you've done that right now. Now you've grown this huge business, um, and so just to transition the conversation now a little bit, you've kind of grown this business. Tell us about COVID, right? Because you started in 17, and we rode this huge wave up in this hugely disruptive event that happened in March 2020, right? And a lot of people, a lot of the scaled operators that raised a bunch of capital weren't able to survive. I personally invested in a few. Those LP checks, were zeros. Um, in a few short months. But there was a select group that thrived, like Mint House. So, not to, what I'm trying to get across with this question is like, how did you build this business where it had resiliency that allowed you to thrive given that disruption? I mean, you're going to kind of walk us through that kind of crazy time in the industry, and how you kind of how you and Mint House came through
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, vividly remember the week when
that.
when COVID, really took hold in March, and really scary times, and it was just really difficult. It was difficult for us. It was difficult for everybody. We watched as the revenue just fell off the books. I think we lost, millions of dollars of bookings in 2 weeks. It was pretty much all gone. Maybe 5% of the bookings were still on our calendar. And so it was a tough time for us. We kind of act quickly and make some immediate layoffs to the team. I think like many companies had to do, and certainly in our space, we're kind of directly in the line of fire of COVID here in the
Yeah.
hospitality space. So what we did is, we regrouped as a team, and we brought folks from all corners of every department in the business, and we created a new special team that was entirely dedicated to sales, but really a new type of sales that we'd never done before, which is 30-day plus sales. And so this meant reaching out to the traveling nurses and doctors and displaced university students, anybody that would need an accommodation for over 30 days. Pretty much the short-term stay was gone. There was none of that. And so by June, we're actually able to now bet it, even at lower rates, we're able to kind of fill up all of our properties around the country.
Nice.
Back up to close to 90% with this 30
Wow.
30-day
Amazing.
30-day plus stay. And so we sort of stabilized the business relatively quickly. And then I'd say we're fortunate. A lot of this stuff, the sad part about entrepreneurship is like there are some things that are totally out of your control, COVID being one of them. But one thing that's working in our favor is we had a decent amount of capital in the bank to kind of sustain a period like that. And then we had kind of made the switch away from leases prior to COVID. And so had a battle tested management agreement already kind of in market. And so when some of these other buildings were vacated, as the operators, weren't able to kind of hang in there through COVID, we were able to step into some of these buildings with management contracts and sort of immediately restart operations. And we could point to the kind of quick success and turnaround that we just had. So
Nice.
our pitch to these building owners was, you're currently earning zero in your whole building or a big chunk of it, and we can immediately apply this model of 30-day plus folks into your building. And so we're able to kind of continue to grow through COVID, which was good.
Yeah, there's a Game of Thrones saying that I really like. Chaos is a ladder. It's but chaos, probably doesn't aptly describe kind of how we all felt. Where you see your book of business completely evaporate and you have all these liabilities and you got to figure out very, very quickly. So shout out to your SWAT team there that was able to pivot so quickly. And I guess luckily you had hopefully you had capital ready to go, and you already had some of these just new business structure battle tested you can go in. And for us, COVID was a big tailwind. It sounds like it was for you as well. So I think a lot for a lot of people right now, where there's a lot of uncertainty. We're recording this in March of March, kind of around the same time as COVID. Actually, today is what March 11th, 2025. 5 years to that anniversary. And look, there is definitely uncertainty right now with what's going on in the new administration and what's happening kind of from a more macro perspective. But I think it's important to stay grounded. Like where you see this industry, if there's a growth path there, how well capitalized you are, how strong your operations are, like kind of really think through that. It's now not the time to. I mean, there is a time to kind of put your head down and just kind of like wait until the storm passes. But that's when some of the real opportunities are. So I always kind of counsel people that make sure that you have some runway, but don't kind of close your eyes completely, because some of the greatest opportunities are when there's dislocation, during COVID, and perhaps something. I'm not saying COVID will happen, but some dislocation that will happen over the next kind of 18 months. Could be some great opportunities out there.
Totally. And I would also just quickly add, with an extreme event like that, I mean, we hopefully won't see something that's that kind of extreme and crazy. But it's also an opportunity for your team. Our team really came together in a way that we hadn't been before. I think everybody sort of understood the urgency. And we, all made a commitment to each other that we were going to, fight as hard as we could to like push through this, push through that time. And so
yeah,
I think to your point, that's just like another thing you kind of like harness the good in these terrible situations, make the most.
And you
So not only from like an opportunity, pure like business opportunity standpoint, but also from like a team building dynamic and so on.
agreed. I mean, it's very clear to in these situations. You get this like real clarity, right? Because it's like, what is the one thing that matters for us? It's like, what is the one thing that matters? And we just kind of focus on every single day. And the things that were important or you thought were important when you're in those situations, like, well, let's get rid of the stuff that is important but isn't critical right now. Let's just like get that critical stuff done first, survive that, and it gives you the real kind of clarity and like what's really working in your business, who's really working in your business, like what properties, what strategies, what technology is really working, and then it's a really nice way to kind of just like clear the deck a little bit. At least
Yeah.
for us, it was like, hey, what these parts of the portfolio are just not going to work, right? Let's get out of them as soon as possible. Let's figure out a way to gracefully exit or retain a relationship. But like, what's really working, and let's just keep doubling down on that. And that ultimately for us got us through that really rough period. And then I think similar to you, we were able to get into buildings and situations where the operator, didn't have the runway and had to step aside, and we were able to offer a solution right away that was able to generate revenue for these landlords very, very quickly. And they're like, okay, well, let me work with you. And that's been, really, that for us is a huge win. And we've been going to ride that through those 5 years, and hopefully continue to grow the business. Maybe. Sorry, go ahead.
I say awesome. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was going to ask you if it was a similar story. So it sounds like you guys were able to
A very similar story. No, we were able to acquire a lot of great, assets, FF&E assets during that time for pennies on the dollar, because they were sitting, there were situations that were just sitting vacant in a storeroom or in a garage where the other people had stepped out, and there was this there, and we're like, well, we can come in and take it in 48 hours. Obviously there's a bunch of stuff that we have to do, but so this is the price that we can offer you, and they were like more than happy to get rid of it. So we had high quality assets that we were able to reposition very, very quickly for pennies on the dollar, and that was a way to drive growth in the business. Plus, at that point they didn't have anyone there, so you can negotiate deals that were that you couldn't get when things are more normalized, and then you kind of had that big tailwind, and then you had scale, and then that momentum just kind of built on itself. So we were fortunate to do that. I do want to come back to one point where for us, so we've never raised capital. This is all kind of personal capital for us. We pivoted pretty strongly to buying. We obviously saw rates where they were in 2020, things were like sub 3%. You saw this big growth in travel and pent up travel from COVID. There was obviously a lot of liquidity in the market at that time too. So we started buying. I think you said in the beginning that you were thinking about buying, in 17 before you kind of went on a different path. Was that something that, as you look back on, maybe kind of acquiring more would have, plus doing what you were doing, was that an option? Or, kind of how do you think about that? How do you think about that decision, the buying versus, kind of the management contracts and building?
Yeah.
That way.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I've certainly like played out that path in my head relative to the one that I took. I think I would go back to what I initially said. Like the only way to build the business that I had kind of envisioned based on those kind of 3 insights that I mentioned in the beginning was to really like go this direction. And I think initially we really did want to get past the lease arbitrage to the management agreement as fast as possible.
Yeah.
But like I think buying, I think doing what you have done is a really interesting way to play the space. And if I were going a more bootstrapped way, I think I would 100% look to own the real estate, whether it's a building or single family homes. So I do know of some folks that, yeah, basically like leverage the lease arbitrage play into being able to own a huge portfolio of single family homes. And their play was always, as they were buying these properties, it was, look, if the numbers drop here, I can convert this over to a traditional 12-month lease, and I should be okay. So I think like leveraging this explosive growth as a means to acquire a portfolio of real estate is an amazing strategy. It's just not the one that was going to realize, building a recognized brand, national brand,
Yeah.
in the alternative hospitality space.
And I love that. I love that answer, and I think that's where I think success comes from a clarity of what you want to accomplish and being kind of true to that. Obviously, you want to not be blind to what's happening in the market, but I think there is something to be said about, hey, this is like what I envision. This is going to create value in the long term. There's always going to be the grass is always going to be greener. On the other side, when you look at, oh well, this is interesting, that's interesting, that's interesting, but I found that like a clarity of strategy and just kind of compounding that over a longer time scale, like that is, or at least through one cycle, that is ultimately going to compound that equity value to yourself, to your investors, and versus trying to do three things at the same time, and you don't do, you kind of do a B plus of three different things, versus if you can do A plus on one thing, that ultimately will drive more value, or in my view, drive more value in the long term, and avoid a bunch of mistakes, because it's just so hard to do a bunch of different things well, candidly.
Totally. Yes, exactly. And yeah, the nice part about buying it slower, but yeah, you can focus on it and you can grow as you choose. Whereas for us, we really we have to move pretty fast, in the early days, because we're trying to quickly race up to a scale that is, would support the overhead that we knew that we needed to build initially.
Yeah.
So you're kind of forced in, but that's the name of that type of strategy, and that's the name of the game. And yeah, so there's in terms of the grass is always greener comment, yeah, like the to be able to move at like a more comfortable pace through an ownership model is certainly appealing, and one that I would reflect on all the time. But yeah,
It's definitely much slower. You're right. I mean, it's definitely much slower.
Yeah, we're just
But
not the one
that fixed. Sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, it just
No,
wasn't the one
sorry.
that was going to work for us. But I love it, and depending on for the folks that are listening, depending on what you're building, like I think that's an excellent strategy.
Yeah. My point was like the fixed cost absorption point, that I think you were alluding to. It's a real thing as you kind of grow and scale a business. You have this kind of U.S. Six-figure type people that you have to hire, right? Someone that's like 250 total comp. That's a real fixed cost that you have to have. Like for us, it's all offshore, obviously lowest cost, lower, kind of different type of labor that we're working with. But if you're growing a business in here in the U.S., like you need scale, because that person or those people that are in that management layer that are six-figure type labor, like you have a bigger portfolio, because that fixed cost needs to be absorbed in some way. You're not going to, you can't hire that. I can't have $250,000 people on a 40-person portfolio. That's a recipe to negative margins pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
The
So,
and maybe like let's talk about your current role. You're the chairman of the board, right? You're the chairman of the board of Midhouse. What does that entail? And a lot of people are like, oh, chairman of the board. Like, what is that? Like, how does your day to day now in the business? And then you guys obviously hired a CEO now to run the business day to day. But like, how does that work?
yeah, so I'm pretty much fully pulled out of all day-to-day operations, and so Christian does an amazing job, leading and running the whole team and charting our path. And so I have a few calls a week from old contacts of mine, old investors that are looking to get in touch with us or have a deal that they want to discuss. And then, of course, at the board meetings, we're all listening to Christian and providing input where we can. But yeah, I would say it's totally different day to day for me than than it was for 8 years when I was founder CEO. or 8+ years, whatever it was. Yeah, I would say, in the founder CEO seats can be kind of all consuming, uh, round the clock, weekend, night. There's stuff coming in. I think, well, my wife and I were reflecting that there wasn't a single vacation that we went on as a family where during that whole 8-year period where I didn't have to fly out of the vacation for at
Oh,
least a day
really?
to go
Oh,
tend to
wow.
something and come back. So, certainly enjoying the like extra headspace that I have today, um, and sleeping a lot better than I did.
Fair enough. Fair enough. No, there's something to be said about. I mean, I didn't know that, and I mean, there's something to be said about having peace of mind of a great team that's kind of operating the business, and you don't have to take those calls. You don't have to take those calls anymore. I uh, I definitely, that was a few years back for us now. Being able to just turn off. I usually just turn off my phone and I put it in the kitchen. I don't even bring it in the bedroom anymore because you just kind of, you have an idea, you think of something, and you kind of take a look, and then an hour and a half later, it's 1 a.m. and like I got to go to bed because my kids are going to wake up at 6 in the morning next day, and they don't care what happened. They're like, hey, I'm up
Right.
here to entertain me. You
Yeah.
have you have two kids and more on the way. As you
Totally.
think about kind of as we wrap up the conversation, as you think about kind of next steps now, you have this experience, you've launched successful businesses. Kind of what's the next chapter for Will? Like, what do you think? What's on the horizon for you? What are you thinking? What are you thinking about the next challenge?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think I love this space, love this category, would love to continue to stay involved in, more than just at Mint House. What exactly that looks like, still coming together. I've got my hands in a few other things that are not short-term rental related, but have not like jumped into something that is all consuming like a Mint House. And so I think like I would be, well, I think maybe what I'll say is like for anyone that's listening out there, if you want to chat, I'm kind of, inclined to pick up the phone and hear what you got. And if there's, any way I can help, I think I would be kind of interested in exploring some opportunities, and if I can be helpful, given my time building Mint House, would love to.
Yeah, no, I mean you have, I mean, you have a great story and a great background on all these relationships. I mean, if anyone's listening that has a great opportunity or looking for senior senior type person that can help them along the journey, we'll put Will's LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Definitely connect with Will and reach out to him. Well, actually, I have a question for you. I forgot to ask. This is something I wanted to cover. I forgot to ask you. How did you come up with the name Mint House? How did the name Mint House come about?
So that's a good question. So it started with the house part. So we were, and what we're trying to communicate is this is like a hotel, but it's different. And so house seemed to be the best container for, this, new concept that we were trying to deliver to the market, which is it's kind of, you can stay there, you can stay and use it as a like a hotel or short-term rental like experience. You could also stay there for a longer period of time. It's kind of like a hotel, except you've got a kitchen, you've got a living room, you've got groceries. It's not a home though, and so house was kind of we thought the right word to communicate kind of all of those different things. It was not it's not like a hotel and not like your home. And then from there, Mint, we liked it, sort of high end, has a business travel connotation. I think there's JetBlue Mint.
Yeah, Jeff. Yeah, I was
Um,
thinking. Yeah.
and we were trying to build trying and are building a premium brand. So Mint sort of got the rest of the picture that we were trying to communicate.
That's cool. No, it's a great name. I love it. It's a very kind of catchy name. When I first heard it, I was like, oh, this is a very smart branding exercise. So shout out to the person that or you and the team that they came up with it, and it's great branding.
Thank you.
My final my final question to you is, entrepreneurship is definitely a team sport, and we wouldn't be where we are today without the folks that have helped us along the way. So my final question to you is, as you kind of reflect on your journey, what was one of the kindest things that someone has done for you along this path that has got you to where you are today?
So when you're just getting started, speaking to someone that is a couple levels beyond you is the most helpful thing in the world. And especially early days, really just putting together the initial every single day is like a dog fight, and just little tidbits of information can be so transformative. So I think like I still remember those people. I remember the people that took a chance on me with either a check or with their time and advice. So I actually made it a kind of a personal rule to answer the call and answer the email from anybody that was maybe a couple steps before me. So I think that's what I'd say. Like, people that paid it, forward, I want to pay it forward again myself. So I would say just generally like all of the people along the way that were able to offer their time, or in some cases capital, was probably one of the nicest things that some people did for me.
That's a great way to end the show. Thank you for being generous with your time. For folks that want to reach out to Will, that are in probably prop tech and real estate and short-term rentals. Will's LinkedIn profile link will be in the show notes, and I'm sure he'd be happy to connect with you and see if there's something that he can be helpful with based on experience. Well, thank you very much for spending your time with us today. I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the show.
Michael. Appreciate it. That was fun.
Perfect. So if you enjoyed this episode, guys, please take a look at our other episodes where we talk with other leading investors and entrepreneurs within the short-term rental space. Connect with them, comment on anything that you liked about this episode, and we can continue to bring on great guests that can help better invest your time and money in your investing journey. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, I'll let this upload. Wow, I went for an hour. Sorry, we went a little longer than expected.
Oh, good.
Oh, perfect. I'll let this upload. Yeah, what'd you think?
That's good. Yeah, as you described, pretty straightforward and simple. But yeah, I think we touched on like a lot of the key parts, like a lot of the interesting decisions and parts of the journey. And so what do you think, like, so are most of these folks, so what is like the audience? Are they've got one property, they've got 0 properties looking